Mr. President, members of the council, I'd like to ask Kurt Spaulding, who is a known expert on environmental matters. He was director for EPA Region 1 in Boston. He was head of Save the Bay. I've known him all the way through the process, as all of you have. Worked with Judy Cox, going back a bit, has worked with governors. But I think his tenure at Brown recently has been the most relevant experience for commenting on the situation with which you guys are dealing right now. Kurt, would you come forward and summarize your qualifications?
Well, and I can share this with the council if that's possible. And while that's being done, I'll just reiterate who I am and part why I'm here. Of course, my name is Kurt Spaulding. I'm a resident of Cranston. I need one copy for myself. So
Oh, okay.
I'm totally lost here. Thank you.
Excuse me, sir, point of clarification, point of order. I just want to say, did Mr. Hart request that this person be certified as an expert?
No, he did
I
not.
don't think he did.
No, he did not.
Thank you for that clarification.
I'll let my statement speak to my credentials. So, as some of you may know, I served as executive director for Save the Bay for 18 years. I was appointed by President Obama to serve as the regional administrator of EPA, and after that I took a position as professor of the practice within the Institute of Environment and Society at Brown University. What I say tonight does not at all reflect the position or points of view of Brown University. What I did do there is spend my time and energy learning how cities are adapting to climate change and the processes they're thinking about and what they're doing in so doing. Key questions. Are cities preparing for the emerging changes that will affect the well-being of every person in their city? And if they are, what are the best practices? This led me to write a chapter in a book called New England Coastal Cities, the Struggle for a Resilient Future. So since my time at EPA, I've really thought about how communities are adapting to climate change. Now today, as you know better than me probably, East Providence has not embarked in a comprehensive or deep effort to develop a resilient plan. Ironically, every city in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has done that. Frankly, Rhode Island is behind in doing that in their communities. It is essential that when you do that kind of work, you look at the assets you have to mitigate climate change going forward. And while I understand you'll embark in that kind of process very soon, hopefully with the help of the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, my research suggests that you'll need to deliberately and extensively evaluate your vulnerabilities and the threats you're going to experience. And you have a lot of coastline, so I don't need to speak in depth about sea level rise. I don't need to speak in depth about the issues of extreme rain. I think if you are paying attention this summer, we all are coming to understand these threats are real. 110 people are dead in Germany because of extreme rain and flooding. And I'll guarantee you the Germans had really strong plans with really strong sensors to try to prevent that kind of catastrophe. We had 110 degrees in the Pacific Northwest. Well, the climate of the Pacific Northwest is very much similar to the climate of New England. They never thought that could happen. Well, it could. It could happen anywhere. So we are seeing climate change today. Our weather now, it was just in the New York Times this morning, our weather now resembles much the weather of New York City in 1970 in New Jersey. It's been humid, it's been hot, we've had almost no sea breeze. The cool climate of New England is no longer what we are experiencing. To understand what's ahead, you just have to know what's happened in the last 6 weeks. So as I said, hundreds of communities have gone ahead and worked on resilience planning, understanding how climate change will affect the community. Now, everything I've heard here tonight is based on statutes of the past. Turns out I was on the original board that wrote the comprehensive planning law. I was also a stakeholder in the special area management plan for the Providence River. So I understand very well the context when all that work was done. I can tell you not a single word was said in any of those processes about climate change and what it's going to do to our communities going forward. wasn't in the conversation. All the law we're hearing about does not talk about climate change. And quite frankly, the Act on Climate Bill that was just passed, which is a milestone bill in the state of Rhode Island, has one provision about communities adapting to climate change. It says you must do it. And it actually has a citizen supervision to kind of push it forward. But I have no idea, and in deference to you, how could you have any idea what that means, right? There's no statute on how we're supposed to do it. So one thing we have learned watching communities go through the process is that open space, green space, is incredibly important for two reasons. One, it helps mitigate climate change. People are planting trees all over communities in New England. Once they realize we have to make our trees greener, it turns out southern cities are greener than northern cities because they're hotter. So as we get hotter, we're going to need green space. We're going to need to plant trees. We're going to need to conserve every acre we have. Now why? Well, it's important to public health. There was just last year a study published in the Lancet Journal looking at all the studies they can find, and it conclusively suggests that protecting green space is good for public health. And measured quantitatively, heart disease, mental well-being, these things, they look at medical records. There was a study down in Chicago where they simply planted some trees near a public housing project, and another one had no trees. And the people with the trees near their public housing project were better measurably in health and mental well-being than those who didn't. So this is about public health. It isn't about some kind of, oh gee, whatever, green space is nice. Now, this is about the well-being of the community. The other piece that's really important, that I'm very close to because I was a big part of it, is the restoration of wildlife and wildlife values in the Upper Bay. One reason so many people have aligned with Keep Metacomet Green is they like wildlife. We're seeing wildlife in this area that was not seen in the 70s. It's a restorative dynamic that's really powerful. We're seeing eagles, we see turkeys, we see coyotes, we see hawks, we see osprey. We're seeing so much wildlife in this upper bay that never existed before, largely because the bay is much cleaner, so they are the source of food. But they also need green spaces like Metacomet to thrive. And it turns out wildlife actually helps people too. The fact that nature is in the community makes them stronger mentally and physically. And again, this is documented work. There's real science in it, and I have references in here. But here's the biggest thing about green space and public health. It mitigates urban heat. And you can say, well, how are we to know how much green space do we need to mitigate the heat? Well, it turns out you can answer that question. People at Georgia Tech, again, Georgia's getting really hot, actually have a model where you could ask them to model what green space needs for mitigating heat islands in a place like East Providence. And then finally, and this is one that I'm most curious about, that if you seriously do a resilience study, you would need to evaluate, is how does this property impact the storm drain system for the neighboring area? And this sort of speaks to some of the issues that would normally be considered in a comprehensive plan. But quite frankly, infrastructure and comprehensive plans are not well tied together. It's one of the unfortunate silos in the way things work in this country when it comes to communities. But you have a storm drain system complete all around Metacomet. And I'm guessing that the water courses through Metacomet actually take that stormwater, and then it goes into the bay through that drainage system. Well, if you have flooding events like they routinely have now in the mid-Atlantic, as I said, that's where our climate's going. We're going to have rain events that exceed 10 to 15 inches over 2 days or 3 days. I'm part of a NSF grant application to look at what ocean warming is going to do to our climate. The ocean has stopped mitigating or essentially absorbing heat. It's taken all it can. It's now going to warm up very, very quickly. 3 degrees of warming in the ocean for us could mean rain events like we've never seen. It's very possible this area, which we've all seen in the map, could be a repository for excess water that flows off the neighborhoods around it in East Providence. That's something to know before you decide to develop 40% of the parcel. And it is knowable. How is it knowable? Well, Cambridge, Massachusetts has already done the work. They've built a storm model, stormwater model with the help of people at MIT, and they are figuring that out. They're figuring out what every piece of green space means to the resilience of that community when it comes to water. So for 100 years, this property has served as a mitigation for the urban heat that East Providence generates as it's grown. It's also served as a place where wildlife flourishes and supports the well-being of the community. I know you're about to head into a period of doing resilience planning. I don't know exactly when it's scheduled. All I'll say though is the Rhode Island resilience planning model is far short of what other states are doing. If I was asked as an expert to advise that process, which perhaps I'm more appropriate for, I would suggest you use these models and you try to figure these things out. Before you do something as dramatic as rezoning 155 acres of wonderful green open space in your community. It just seems these are things you want to know. And you could find them out. I just want to make that point. What you're going to do perhaps with the workshop that's upcoming is you're going to look at existing challenges and come up with a list of projects. That's far short of the kind of analysis I think you're going to need to do, and that Rhode Island communities will have to do if they're truly going to be capable of adapting to climate change. So first of all, I thank you for your service and your efforts. I know this is hard work. I served on that side of the table for numbers of Superfund projects, and believe it or not, the contentious issues that come around when you're trying to clean up a contaminated site are serious and meaningful, and I know the kind of work you're all going to have to put in. So thank you for your time.
Mr. President, Mr. Spaulding or Dr. Spaulding?
Mr. Spaulding.
Mr. Spaulding, Nate Cahoon, everything that you just said resonates with me. I have a Bachelor's of Science from Brown University in biology. I have a Master's in bioinformatics from Northeastern. And everything that you said is spot on with regard to science. Society has been way behind the 8 ball on this matter, really since the time we recognized it, officially or otherwise, and I agree wholeheartedly. We should have all that information before us, before we're charged to make a decision.
Right.
Yes.
We will not have that information before us, before we are charged to make the decision tonight, which is vote to rezone or vote not to rezone. And my question with regard to everything that you just said is, are you familiar with what's permissible under the current zoning of the property? What I see in a proposal before us tonight is a proposal that provides to the city ownership of approximately 10 acres of space as is, preserves approximately 50 acres of another plot of land on that space, meaning it cannot be developed. What I see on the other side, should we vote not to rezone, is a gigantic question mark, which per the current open space zoning can include everything from helipads to medical facilities or hospitals to educational facilities to not open space. I think that there is an assumption by many of the folks who are opposed to the rezone that if the council votes not to rezone, then the property remains as is. I'm looking at this from the lens of a developer who has made a substantial investment in the property and is going to want return on that investment, and should this fail, is going to do whatever they can to get that return on investment. So that said, understanding that before we make a decision of this, kind of momentous, right, magnitude, that we should have that information before us. How do we know whether voting to rezone or not to rezone makes us better or worse in one way or the other with all the aspects that you just talked about?
Well, I'm not in your seat, and I think there are probably different opinions about what they have the right to do under the current zoning designation. So I'll defer on that, but I guess I would ask if you could buy more time, you should. Every resilience plan than I've seen done across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, through Connecticut, open space, the ability to plant trees, the ability to keep green space open is becoming more and more valuable. Now maybe if the circumstances are as you say they are, you're presuming a certain course of action on the part of the developer. That's a tough choice.
No, I mean,
I would argue if you could buy more time, you should.
I am presuming, right, and I'm presuming that generally people don't walk away from multi-million-dollar investments and just let them be. And when I compare it to like a situation with what happened at Firefly Golf Course in Seacomp, where that's still sitting vacant, and my interpretation, not anybody else's, is that the developer is simply waiting for a more favorable council before they can come in and do what they ultimately wanted to anyway. And I look at the needs of the city, it's a tough thing for me to balance, particularly with regard to the environmental impact, one way or the other.
Right. I recognize, again, I'm not an expert in what they can do. I'm not a land use attorney, so I'm going to defer on your supposition and only say that I'll just say how it turns out. I think at some point in time, based on the kind of climate change impact we're going to see, and I just want to add this point, as much as we've seen already, this summer we're experiencing, it's pretty hot in here, pretty humid, it's only going to increase.
I agree.
We're at the knee of the curve. It's going to grow very quickly, and it's only going to take one or two really disastrous events, then I think the whole situation will change, and we'll start to see the investment in Rhode Island that's necessary for the kind of planning communities need to do. That honestly, just to give you a reference, you're about 60,000 population.
About 50.
50?
Yeah.
All right, New Bedford's 80, same difference, small city. They got a grant of $125,000 from the Commonwealth to build the models and understand these impacts. You're not going to get anything, honestly. You're going to be told to do a workshop in a half day's time and make good judgment on what your existing public works and planning group can produce. I just think that's far short of what you need, but that's what you're going to have to do, and I really sympathize for you in that regard. But I can't answer your question knowing, I don't, maybe they will, maybe they won't. They've got choices. They may say, okay, we'll take another crack at this and try to do more mitigation. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So with that being said, we're going to open up the floor